There's a peculiar paradox quietly unraveling at the heart of modern civilization. We are more connected than ever digitally entangled across oceans and continents, accessing centuries of knowledge with the flick of a thumb. We've peered into the heart of black holes, deciphered the code of life itself, and sent robotic emissaries to distant planets. And yet, more people than ever feel misplaced. Not just misunderstood, but cosmically misaligned, as if they were dropped into the wrong century, the wrong species, or perhaps the wrong planet altogether. This isn't the kind of isolation that gets solved with social interaction. It's a metaphysical ache, a quiet knowing, a strange gravitational pull towards something bigger, something just beyond the veil of the visible. This sensation is not random. In fact, it may be the first sign that you're part of a group unofficial and unspoken whose members are scattered across the globe, like stardust seated in human form. They're often called lightworkers, not because they glow under a microscope or carry titles bestowed by religion or science, but because their very presence disrupts inertia. They're the ones who walk into a room and, without saying a word, shift the energy. They feel more than they should, see through things others dismiss. Question systems, most accept and know. It's not because they read a few books on personal development. It's because something deeper lives in their bonesome ancient mission coded into their being, waiting to be remembered. But remember what exactly? Let's pull the camera back not just a little but cosmically far. From the perspective of the universe, Earth is not just a planet, it's a crucible. A dense, volatile, emotionally saturated testing ground for consciousness itself. And in every system, whether astrophysical or biological, there comes a time when something must evolve or collapse. That's where lightworkers enter the equation. Dolores Cannon, though not a scientist by trade, presented an idea that harmonizes curiously well with modern theories of emergent systems. She proposed that many souls incarnating now came from elsewhere from other dimensions, frequencies, or star systems, not for dominance, but for stewardship. They volunteered to assist Earth in its shift toward higher awareness. If that idea sounds poetic, it is. But poetry is often the language we use when words fall short of complex truth. And science, at its best, is the discipline of decoding the poetry of the universe. So let's approach this logically. Imagine consciousness as a spectrum-like electromagnetic radiation. Most people operate somewhere in the middle frequencies, concerned with survival, identity, belonging, ambition, but there are those who vibrate toward the higher ends of that spectrum, where intuition, empathy, and transpersonal awareness reside. These individuals don't just think they feel reality. They don't just analyze systems, they sense their energetic footprints. They don't just see people, they see through them. And this level of sensitivity is both a gift and a burden. Because when you're designed to navigate by starlight, living among neon signs can be disorienting. Lightworkers are often overwhelmed, not because they are weak, but because they are finely tuned instruments dropped into a noisy, chaotic environment. It's like putting a telescope in the middle of a rave. Their nervous systems register what others ignore. Their emotional fields absorb what others deflect. They are not fragile, they are exquisitely receptive. And in a society that rewards emotional armor, their transparency becomes both their power and their trial. They feel isolated, not in the traditional sense of lacking social contact, but in the existential sense of being out of phase with the dominant frequency of the world around them. While others chase status, they long for depth. While others seek certainty, they're drawn to mystery. They often grow up feeling like anthropologists in their own families, studying human behavior from the inside out. And no amount of social media likes can fill the void of not being seen in their essence. They experience emotional overload. Neuroscientifically, this is tied to heightened activity in mirror neurons and the anterior cingulate cortex regions associated with empathy and pain perception. In plain terms, they don't just sympathize with suffering, they inhabit it. News headlines, violent imagery, or even a passing stranger's grief can lodge itself in their psyche like emotional shrapnel. This sensitivity isn't a glitch, it's part of their design, but it requires management, discipline, and self-career lesson. Many lightworkers learn the hard way. They struggle with boundaries. Their default setting is service. They say yes when their soul screams no. They overgive, overextend, and over-identify with the wounds of others, and eventually the imbalance manifests through burnout, illness, or spiritual fatigue. Because a candle that burns for everyone else but never returns to its own flame eventually flickers out. And perhaps most profoundly, they suffer from the veil of forgetfulness. The moment of incarnation descent into the human form comes with amnesia. This is not metaphorical, it's structural. The brain is built to prioritize adaptation, not remembrance. But lightworkers carry deep within their subconscious echoes of a different kind of reality, one where unity is not a concept, but a constant. They can't name it, but they miss it. They search for something they've never seen here, but know exists. And that longing, that homesickness for the infinite, is both their compass and their cross. But despite all this, despite the ache, the confusion, the exhaustion, they stay. They stay on a planet where people argue about borders drawn on maps while floating on a giant rock that itself orbits a star in a galaxy that's just one of billions. They stay where injustice screams louder than truth, where systems reward greed over grace, where empathy is seen as weakness. And they stay not because they have to, but because they chose to. You see, lightworkers understand something most forget, that consciousness evolves through challenge and that love is the most powerful organizing principle in the universe, stronger than gravity, more persistent than entropy, more illuminating than any supernova. And even though they are human and flawed and tired, they embody that love in action, not in grand speeches, but in small moments, listening without judgment, showing up with presence, holding space for others to remember who they are. They are not here to escape the world. They are here to heal I-tone vibration, one breath, one truth at a time. To understand the challenge of being a light worker is to understand what it means to hold a frequency that is not native to the world you walk in. It's to carry silence in a culture addicted to noise, to embody stillness in a civilization that rewards the loudest scream, to carry clarity where confusion has become currency. This is not an act of rebellion. It's an act of return, a return to coherence, to alignment, to truth not truth as opinion, but truth as resonance. For the light worker, truth isn't something argued over. It's something felt in the bones, like gravity. You don't have to believe in it for it to shape your reality. But reality on Earth is uniquely unstable. You see, our planet is one of contrasts. It is a place of extremes, deserts and oceans, silence and sirens, innovation and ignorance. And within this collision of opposites, consciousness sharpens. The soul is tempered like steel by friction, not by ease. And so, for light workers, their greatest tests aren't found in the metaphysical, but in the mundane. In holding integrity when no one notices. In telling the truth when silence would be more profitable. In showing kindness where cruelty is easier. In resisting the pull of apathy in a world that normalizes emotional numbness as survival. And this leads us to one of the most invisible challenges light workers face. The psychological weight of remembering in a world built to forget. Society today, with all its algorithmic seductions and dopamine distractions, is a carefully curated machine designed to keep you occupied but never awakened. It sells you comfort while stealing your clarity. It gives you freedom of choice but not freedom of thought. And lightworkers feel this as a suffocation not of breath, but of meaning. It's not the stress of doing too much, it's the agony of doing too little of what truly matters. And so they often retreat, not out of bitterness, but for recalibration. Like astronauts adjusting to Earth's gravity after floating in the fluid grace of space, they need time to readjust, to ground, to remember that healing is not a sprint, it's a calibration of the soul to its natural state. But even in their retreat, the world calls. Because the world, whether it knows it or not, is starving for authenticity, for coherence, for presence. And when lightworkers emerge from their solitude, they don't come bearing slogans or manifestos. They come bearing frequency, a calm voice in a storm, a quiet gaze that says, I see you not as who you pretend to be, but as who you've always been. And that gaze alone, that moment of recognition, can begin to dissolve the illusion of separation Because underneath every label, race, status, gender, belief there is consciousness. There is the observer. And light workers don't speak to your role, they speak to your essence. They don't try to fix you, they remind you that you were never broken. Now let's talk about impact. Because one of the most painful paradoxes for light workers is this. They often feel invisible in a world that desperately needs what they offer. Their work is subtle. It doesn't trend. It doesn't sell. It doesn't perform well in metrics, but it moves reality. And if we look through the lens of systems theory or chaos mathematics, we find that small, well-placed inputs can generate disproportionate effects over time. A butterfly wing flapping in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas. This isn't poetic metaphor, it's called the butterfly effect. So too does one act of genuine kindness, one moment of courage, ripple through families, communities, generations. Lightworkers are those butterflies operating not at the level of spectacle, but at the level of causality. They change timelines without needing to be seen. And yet, the human part of them still aches. Because even knowing the cosmic scope of their mission, they must still live with the friction of earthly limitation. Rent must be paid. Bodies must be fed. Emotions must be processed. And this introduces one of the most persistent tensions they face: how to balance the spiritual and the material. In a world where survival often eclipses transcendence, how do you stay devoted to your mission without being consumed by the machinery of daily life? There's no simple answer, but perhaps the metaphor of dual orbits can help. Imagine being in orbit around two centers of gravity, one spiritual, one material. If you move too close to one, you risk being pulled completely off course by the other. But if you can maintain balance, allowing both to inform but not dominate, you enter into what physicists call a Lagrange point, a place of equilibrium where forces cancel each other out, allowing stillness amidst motion. Lightworkers are learning slowly to live in that space, not by rejecting the world, nor by surrendering to it, but by embodying a third way, a way of alignment. But alignment doesn't come from wishful thinking. It comes from radical responsibility, from accepting that even though you may not have chosen the conditions you were born into, you are still accountable for what you create from them. Victimhood may be valid, but it is not a home. Lightworkers know that. They don't deny their pain, they transmute it. They don't wait for the world to change, they become the change vector within it. Like neutron stars, they may be small in number, but their density, energetically speaking, is immense. And just as neutron stars bend the space-time around them, lightworkers bend the emotional landscape of any room they enter. And that's why they are needed now more than ever, because humanity stands at a strange threshold. We are technologically advanced, but emotionally primitive. We can simulate consciousness, but cannot sit with our own. We are addicted to certainty, but allergic to truth. We are more afraid of stillness than of war. And yet, despite all of this, perhaps because of all of this, the Lightworker emerges not as a savior, not as a guru, but as a tuning fork, a resonant reminder of what it means to be fully human, fully awake, fully alive. Their challenge is not just to survive this world, but to reimagine it, to hold the vision of what could be, even while living in what is, to build bridges between science and spirit, between silence and speech, between isolation and intimacy. And they must do all this while still remembering to rest, to laugh, to love, to breathe. Because in the end, being a lightworker is not a role. It is a state of being, a frequency, a remembering. And once you touch that level of awareness, you can never go back not fully. The world becomes both more painful and more beautiful. Every moment is infused with meaning, even when the meaning isn't clear. Every encounter becomes a mirror, reflecting not just who others are, but who you are becoming. And perhaps that is the ultimate challenge. Not to change the world by force, but to remain changed just consistently, quietly, defiantly in a world that forgets itself daily. To remain changed in a world addicted to amnesia, that is the quiet revolution of the Lightworker. Because what you are remembering is not information, it is not doctrine, it is not even identity, it is resonance. It is the felt cellular remembrance that you are more than your name, more than your profession, more than your wounds. You are a node of awareness in a network far beyond what most ever see. You are quite literally the universe becoming conscious of itself through your eyes, your skin, your thoughts. And that awareness comes with weight, because when you see through the veil, you can't unsee. When you feel the pain behind the performance, the despair under the humor, the hunger beneath the greed, you can't pretend otherwise. And so you carry it, not because you want to, but because your nervous system doesn't know how not to. This is what many call empathy, but the word fails to capture the full magnitude. It's not about emotion, it's about frequency absorption. Lightworkers function like emotional solar panels. They absorb, convert, and if trained, radiate energy that uplifts others, often at great cost to themselves. And that brings us to the unspoken reality. Many lightworkers are exhausted, not just tired, existentially depleted, not from effort alone, but from navigating a planet that is in many ways still running on outdated operating systems. Separation, scarcity, control. They move through systems that reward conformity over consciousness, productivity over presence. And so each day they wage an invisible war not against others, but against the erosion of their own essence. Yet still they persist, because inside each lightworker is a seed of something ancient. You might call it source or the quantum field or God or just the unnameable intelligence behind all things. It doesn't matter the language. The resonance is the same. That seed is indestructible. You can forget it, you can ignore it, you can numb it, but you cannot extinguish it. And in your darkest hours, it is that seed that keeps glowing, quiet, undemanding, steady. It doesn't push, it pulses. Not like a shout, but like a heartbeat. And so lightworkers are drawn again and again toward practices and spaces that allow them to feel that heartbeat more clearly. Some find it in meditation, others in music, others in science, art, parenting, protest, prayer. The form doesn't matter. The function is the same, to realign the self with something more real than the noise of the world. And what is that something real? It's what physicists call coherence. When particles fall into phase, when chaos becomes pattern, when random becomes rhythm, coherence is the hidden order beneath entropy. It's what allows galaxies to spiral, DNA to replicate, minds to focus. Lightworkers, in many ways, are agents of coherence. They sense dissonance in relationships, in culture, in system sand. Their entire being wants to resolve it, not to control it, not to win, but to harmonize. Because harmony is not passivity, it is the physics of resilience. A stringed instrument in tune resists chaos not by fighting, but by resonating louder than the noise. But here's the catch. You cannot create external coherence if your internal frequencies are fractured. And this is perhaps the deepest challenge of all. The lightworker must do the inner work first. They must face the very wounds they came to help heal. They must walk through their own shadow before guiding others through theirs. Because wisdom without embodiment is just decoration. Light without roots becomes blinding. So they descend. They descend into trauma, into memory, into the awkward terrain of humanness, into grief that has no language, into longing that has no object, into ancestral patterns and karmic entanglements that stretch far beyond a single lifetime. They do not descend to suffer. They descend to integrate. Because what you integrate, you transcend. And what you transcend, you can then transmit as frequency to others. This is not glamorous work. It will not trend. It is not always pretty. Healing rarely is. It looks at times like isolation, like confusion, like starting over. It feels often like dying because part of you is the part that was never you to begin with. The stories, the masks, the coping mechanisms, the inherited scripts. And as those layers dissolve, what remains is not emptiness, it is essence. And that essence is what the world is starving for. Not opinions, not dogma, not performance, but presence. And presence, when embodied by someone in full awareness, becomes transformational. Not because it fixes people, but because it reminds them of who they were before they forgot. That's the real mission of the Lightworker. Not to awaken others by force, but to become so awake yourself that your very being serves as a lighthouse. No words needed. just frequency, just field, just love pure, unflinching, undistorted by ego. And love, by the way, is not an emotion. It's not a Hallmark card or a poetic abstraction. It is the fundamental binding force of the universe. Love is what holds atoms together. What compels life to replicate? What guides stars into their orbits and humans into each other's arms? Love is not the opposite of logic. It is logic in its most advanced form. And lightworkers, those tuned to its signal air, the custodians of that force, in a world that often confuses control for care. So yes, their path is hard, not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to feel what others deny, because they are willing to live without armor, because they refuse to normalize numbness. They are not here to escape the matrix. They are here to rewire it, not through rebellion, but through resonance. They are not saviors. They are reminders. They are not special. They are aligned. They are not perfect. They are practicing. And they are here now, at a time when the world seems more divided, more cynical, more afraid than ever. They are quietly holding the line, holding the vibration, holding the vision of what humanity could be if only we remembered what we already are, if only we stopped confusing noise for knowledge, if only we paused long enough to hear that soft, steady pulse beneath it all, the signal of coherence, the rhythm of awakening, the heartbeat of the universe itself echoing through the bones of those who remember. And that heartbeat steady, ancient, and patientis, not metaphor, it is measurable, not with a stethoscope or a smartwatch, but in the fields of quantum resonance, bioenergetics, and heart-brain coherence. The Institute of Heart Math and others have begun to explore what mystics always intuited, that the human heart is more than a pump. It is a frequency generator, a transmitter of emotion, a compass of coherence. When a person aligns their breath, their intention, their awareness into a state of deep presence, the heart rhythm begins to synchronize with the brain, and from there, like ripples in a still pond, it radiates outward, measurably, detectably, tangibly. The body becomes an antenna. And the signal it sends is not just electromagnetic, it is relational, social, spiritual. Lightworkers live in that domain. They are tuned not to surface-level behavior, but to signal. They sense the quality of your presence before you speak. They feel the tension in a room like a shift in weather. They know when someone's words do not match their vibration. This is not magic. It is pattern recognition refined by lifetimes. The price for this sensitivity, of course, is weight. They walk through a world flooded with noise advertisements, posturing, pain, and their nervous system becomes overclocked. They often retreat, not out of arrogance, but to recalibrate. And even in retreat, they feel the pull, the gravitational responsibility, not to fix the world, but to remain available to it. That's the paradox. They're most impactful not when they are doing, but when they are being. They are most powerful not in effort, but in presence. And yet the world measures value by metrics show. Much did you produce? What did you earn? How do you compare? And so the lightworker must straddle two worlds, the visible and the invisible, the measurable and the meaningful, the economic and the energetic. That straddling becomes especially pronounced when it comes to purpose, because most lightworkers, though they carry a powerful mission, don't know exactly what it is. Or they did once and lost sight of it amidst the noise, or they second guess it, or they know it deeply, but cannot seem to convert it into a socially acceptable career. This friction between inner calling and outer conformity produces a form of cognitive dissonance that no self-help book fully resolves. You see, it's not just about following your passion. It's about reconciling two maps, your soul map and society's GPS. And these maps rarely align perfectly. One moves in spirals, the other in grids. One values integration, the other optimization. So the lightworker must walk a non-linear path in a linear world. They must trust what cannot be proven. Move when the inner signal says move, even when the logic says stay. And often, that leap is misinterpreted by family, by peers, even by themselves as foolishness. But Science knows this pattern well. Paradigm shifts always begin in discomfort. Galileo was not popular, neither was Copernicus, nor were the first thinkers to suggest that invisible particles could cause disease, or that light could behave as both particle and wave. The pioneers of any domain, whether physical or metaphysical, are first ridiculed, then ignored, and finally accepted once the world catches up. So too with the Lightworker. Their signal is ahead of the curve. Their knowing is upstream from mainstream thought, and that can be isolating. But it also reveals a deeper truth, that loneliness for the Lightworker is not a flaw. It is a frontier. It is the boundary between worlds, the threshold between the known and the possible. And those who walk that edge are not victims of isolation. They are cartographers of new territory. What they map in silence, others will one day call common sense. Until then, they must cultivate one of the rarest virtues in the human repertoire, inner validation, the ability to keep going without applause, to stay rooted without recognition, to love without reciprocation, to speak truth even when the echo returns empty, because they are not guided by popularity. They are guided by alignment. And alignment is not always comfortable, but it is always clear. And clarity in this age is revolutionary, because clarity disrupts confusion. It disrupts propaganda. It disrupts generational trauma. It shines light on inherited assumptions. It pierces through the fog of this is just how things are and opens space for the deeper question, what else is possible? That question is where Lightworkers live. They do not accept reality as final. They understand that this world, like any organism, is malleable, in flux, responding not just to actions, but to awareness. What we observe, we affect. What we focus on, we feed. What we believe, we build. So when Lightworkers choose to stay awake, to stay kind, to stay aligned in the face of all the forces, asking them to numb out, shut down, or conform, they are not being soft. They are shaping the morphogenetic field of the future. They are becoming gravity wells for a more compassionate reality. And gravity, real gravity, doesn't yell. It doesn't demand. It simply pulls, it draws, it attracts. That is the quiet power of light. It doesn't argue. It illuminates. And so, dear listener, if you have ever felt out of place in this world, if you have ever wondered why the rules never made sense, why the noise always felt unbearable, why your heart breaks a little each time someone chooses fear over love, it may not be because you are broken. It may be because you are built for something else, not to escape this world, but to help remake it. And you're not alone. There are other Smillians, perhaps who carry a similar pulse. Some are healers, some are scientists, some are artists, some are parents, some are revolutionaries. Some are just learning to hear their own signal again. But together, even scattered, you form a constellation, a living map of memory, of mission, of light. And no, this doesn't mean life gets easier. In many ways, it becomes more demanding, more honest, more real, but also more meaningful. Because when you're walking in alignment, not with a script, but with your soul, you no longer measure success by achievement, you measure it by coherence. You measure it by how you feel when you're alone with your own breath. You measure it by how deeply you've remembered who you really are and how gently you help others do the same. That is the legacy of the Lightworker. Not statues, not awards, but timelines shifted, hearts softened, futures rewritten. And a world one day that forgets less and remembers more, not because you shouted, but because you shined. And so we arrive not at the end of the journey, but at the edge of its beginning. Because for the Lightworker, there is no final arrival. There is only deeper embodiment. You do not graduate from this path. You dissolve into it. You don't finish the work. You become the work itself. It shapes how you love, how you listen, how you sit in silence. It informs how you treat the cashier, how you respond to injustice, how you forgive those who still sleepwalk through their lives. And above all, it determines how you respond to yourself not as a project to fix, but as a phenomenon to understand. You see, the real transformation happens not when you discover your mission, but when you realize your being is the mission. That by simply standing in your truth, rooted in awareness, breathing with integrity, you become a frequency carrier, a resonator, a prism through which the unnameable becomes visible. And in a world that worships spectacle, you become a sacred anomalia reminder that real power does not announce itself. It simply exists, and everything around it adjusts. This is not easy work. It's not always joyful, but it is sacred. And it requires courage enough, the kind that rushes into battle, but the quieter kind that wakes up every morning willing to feel, to question, to hold space for others without losing yourself in the process. It requires the courage to trust a future you cannot yet see, to walk a path without signage, to build a bridge while standing on its edge. And here's the thing. You're not here to be perfect. You're not here to have all the answers. You're here to remain in inquiry, to remain in alignment, to keep choosing coherence, even when confusion would be easier. You are not here to save the world. You're here to love it deeply, intelligently, unwaveringly, to love it not because it's simple, but because it's worthy. Because somewhere beneath its noise and its fractures and its sleep, there is something luminous trying to remember itself through the human story. Lightworkers are the midwives of that remembering. They walk into systems not to destroy them, but to reveal what they've forgotten. They step into relationships not to control, but to mirror what's real. They inhabit bodies not to escape them, but to anchor the sacred into the physical. They do not retreat from darkness. They move through it, carrying the kind of light that doesn't blind but guides, the kind of light that doesn't preach but invites, the kind of light that doesn't separate but connects. And maybe that's the most important truth of all, that the Lightworker's true power is not in changing others, but in changing the gravitational field of possibility, in reminding every soul they meet in for just a moment that they are part of something immeasurably vast and exquisitely intimate, that they are not broken, that they are not alone, that they are, in fact, a thread in the great fabric of consciousness, and that their presence, quiet, imperfect, sinceris, part of the pattern we're all weaving. So if you've been carrying this path alone, know this: the constellation is forming. Others are out there, maybe quietly, maybe uncertainly, but pulsing all the same with the same strange, steady hum that brought you here. And as each of us holds our frequency through doubt, through grief, through fatigue, we begin to shift the field, not with noise, not with force, but with resonance, with coherence, with love that doesn't flinch. Because in the end, the greatest challenge Lightworkers face is also their greatest gift, to remember who they are in a world that has forgotten. And in doing so, to help that world remember too. Not through spectacle, but through presence. Not through answers, but through embodiment. Not through escape, but through return. Return to what has always been true, that we are not fragments, but frequencies. Not accidents, but assignments. That we are not here to fit in, but to tune in. Not to dominate, but to harmonize. And when enough of us truly remember that, we won't need to fight for change. We'll simply become it. And the universe, like it always does, will respond in kind.